There is a good chance that somewhere near your house in the same shaded corner of the porch or the same gap under the steps, something has been sitting in the exact same spot for years, not hiding, not hunting, just sitting there, evening after evening, close enough to touch, while the porch light hums above it and moths circle in and out of the glow. You've seen it. You've probably stepped around it without a second thought, maybe even nudged it out of the way with your shoe once or twice, or watched your dog sniff at it and pulled the leash back out of instinct without really knowing why. But you have never actually stopped to ask what it is, how long it's actually been there, or what's really happening inside that motionless little body while it waits in the dark, patient in a way almost nothing else in your yard ever is. It's a toad, not a frog, though most people use the two words like they mean the same thing. Dry, bumpy skin instead of smooth and slick. Short, sturdy legs built for a slow, determined walk instead of a spring-loaded leap. A body that looks at first glance like something you'd rather sweep off the step than look at twice. Most people's entire opinion of this animal was formed in about 2 seconds, the very first time they saw one, and it has never been updated since warty slow, faintly unpleasant to touch. Something you avoid, not something you'd ever describe as one of the strangest, most quietly successful survival machines currently operating in your own backyard. Here's what almost nobody notices when they see one of these sitting still in the grass. Look just behind its eyes at those two raised, swollen bumps sitting like shoulders on its back. Those aren't warts. They aren't decoration, and they aren't some kind of skin condition. They are glands. And right now, while you're watching, they are actively producing poison. Not occasionally, not only when threatened, all day, every day, whether the toad ever ends up needing it or not. It's called bufatoxin, and it is a genuinely serious chemical weapon, milky and bitter, sitting ready just beneath the surface of the skin. A dog that mouths the wrong toad can end up drooling uncontrollably, vomiting, stumbling, sometimes far worse. In parts of the world, closely related toad species have killed animals many times their own size, and yet the toad sitting 3 feet from your kitchen door has been carrying this arsenal, fully loaded for its entire adult life, and has never once used it to attack anything. Not an insect, not a bird, not you. That's the part that should stop you cold. This is not a weapon built for offense. The toad cannot spit it, spray it, or fling it in your direction. The only way that poison does anything at all is if a predator physically bites down on the toad first. Everything about this animal's chemistry exists purely so that something else's mistake becomes its own last mistake. Never the toad's. It is not a hunter armed to kill. It is a target that has spent millions of years making itself extremely expensive to eat. And it doesn't stop at chemistry. When something does grab it anyway, the toad has one more trick left. It draws in a breath and puffs its whole body up like a small balloon, swelling just enough that its shape no longer fits comfortably down a predator's throat, buying precious extra seconds for whatever animal made the mistake to reconsider and let go. Two separate defense systems, one chemical and one purely physical, running quietly inside an animal. Most people assume has no defenses at all beyond simply being unpleasant to look at. There's even a posture for it. Corner a toad and it won't run far. Instead, it lowers its head, hunches its shoulders forward, and turns those two poison glands directly toward whatever is threatening it, almost like raising a shield exactly where a mouth is most likely to land. It isn't running away from the danger so much as calmly presenting the one part of its body built specifically to end the conversation. To understand why any of this exists, you have to go back a very long way. Toads, in one form or another, have been sitting in damp corners of the world for well over 150 million years. Before most of the mammals you'd recognize today ever existed, before flowering plants had really taken over the planet, something very much like this toad was already doing exactly what it's doing on your porch tonight. That kind of staying power doesn't come from being fast, or strong, or clever. It comes from being extraordinarily hard to profitably eat, generation after generation, for longer than almost anything else alive today. The poison glands are only one piece of the design. Look closer at how this animal actually catches its dinner, and there's another piece of engineering most people never notice. A toad's tongue is anchored at the front of its mouth instead of the back, which means it can flip forward and snap an insect out of the air in a fraction of a second, faster than your eye can properly follow the motion. The prey is usually caught, coated in sticky mucus, and swallowed whole before it even understands what happened to it. Swallowing itself involves something genuinely bizarre. A toad cannot chew. Instead, it uses its own eyeballs to help push food down its throat, retracting them down into its skull with every single gulp, so that from the outside it looks like the toad is blinking hard every time it eats. Its eyes aren't just for seeing danger coming, they're part of the digestive machinery. Even the eyes themselves are built for a very specific kind of vigilance. The pupils sit horizontal rather than round, stretching its field of view almost all the way around its head without needing to turn, which is exactly how it manages to notice a shadow moving toward it long before that shadow notices the toad. Just behind behind those eyes, a flat circular patch of skin works as an eardrum sitting right on the surface. No external ear at all, just a taut membrane tuned to catch the lowest vibrations moving through the ground and the air around it. That same skin does double duty as camouflage. The mottled browns and dull olive greens aren't random. They're tuned by evolution to match dead leaves, packed dirt, and shadowed mulch so closely that most predators, and most humans, walk within inches without ever registering that anything is there at all. The toad isn't hiding under something. It's simply wearing the ground itself, sitting perfectly still and trusting the pattern on its own back to do the rest of the work. Drinking works differently than you'd expect too. A toad never sips water with its mouth. Instead, it presses a specific patch of skin low on its belly and hind legs against damp soil or morning dew, and absorbs moisture directly through that skin, like a living sponge with a single dedicated intake valve. And when the cold months arrive, that same toad doesn't simply hide. It digs backward into the earth using the hard edges of its hind feet, burrowing down below the frost line, sometimes more than a foot deep, and slows its entire body down to the edge of stillness until spring arrives to wake it again. Even reproduction follows a pattern shaped by all of this patience. Every spring, the same toad you've been ignoring may travel a surprising distance overland, sometimes hundreds of meters, back to the exact pond or puddle where its own life began, guided by instincts scientists still don't fully understand. There, the female lays her eggs not in a loose clump like most frogs, but in two long, delicate strings, sometimes thousands of eggs, stretched out like beads, and wrapped carefully around underwater plants, in the very same water where she herself first opened her eyes. On the right spring night, that same pond can turn into something you'd never expect from an animal this quiet. The rest of the year, dozens of males arrive at once and start calling in a long, rolling trill, each one repeating his own note over and over until the whole pond edge hums with sound, a chorus built entirely to help females find their way through the dark to exactly the right water. For one loud, crowded week, the most unremarkable animal in your yard becomes the loudest thing in the entire neighborhood after sunset. Now consider what a creature built this carefully for survival actually does with all that time. A single toad can eat well over 1,000 insects in a single season. Slugs, cutworms, beetles, mosquitoes, the exact pests that spend their nights quietly destroying a garden you've spent all year growing. Gardeners who understand this don't chase toads away from their flower beds. They build them small shaded shelters on purpose, tuck broken clay pots into damp corners just for them, and treat a resident toad the way you'd treat an employee who works the entire night shift for free and never once asks for a raise. This isn't a new idea either. More than a century ago, English gardeners valued toads so highly for their pest control that specially designed clay shelters, small enough to fit in one hand, were sold in gardening catalogs specifically to attract and house them. People paid actual money to invite this animal into their yard on purpose decades before anyone understood the chemistry sitting quietly behind its eyes. Most of the fear surrounding this animal doesn't hold up under any real scrutiny either. The old warning that touching a toad gives you warts is, and always has been, completely false. Warts come from a human virus that no toad has ever carried in its entire evolutionary history. The worst that ordinary contact usually does is leave a mild irritation if you happen to touch your eyes or mouth right afterward without washing your hands first. Easily avoided, and nothing close to the danger people casually assume. And here's the detail that ties this whole story back to that same quiet spot on your porch. Toads have an extremely strong sense of home. Once one settles into a burrow, or a shaded gap that suits it, it will often return to that exact same location, night after night, year after year, for a decade or more without ever really leaving. Some individuals have been documented living well past 20 years in the wild, occasionally even longer under the right conditions. The toad you've been quietly stepping around by your back steps may not be some random passing visitor at all. It may be the very same individual that was already quietly living there before you ever moved in. So the next time you catch sight of that motionless shape sitting under the porch light and feel that automatic little flicker of dislike, it's worth pausing for just a second on what you're actually looking at. Not a pest, not a threat waiting to happen. A small, ancient, fully armed survivor that has outlasted ice ages and asteroid winters using nothing but patience and chemistry, that has never once turned any of that chemistry against you, and that has probably been quietly sharing your address for years without ever asking for anything in return except to be left exactly where it is. The things that look the least remarkable so often turn out to be the ones most worth a second look. This one has been waiting right outside your door the entire time, has survived longer than almost anything else that shares your address, and was never really asking you for anything at all, except maybe to finally be seen for what it actually is.